This is the California Liberty Project podcast.
So welcome back to the California Liberty Project podcast. Back in 2023, this is our second or third episode. We're really glad that you're all back with us. We've had some great episodes already. Really excited about this episode here today. But before we get to our guest and this great discussion here today, I want to make sure that everyone has subscribed to this channel. You know, more and more people are subscribing. Downloads are increasing, which is awesome. But remember to like it. And please, if you can, leave a brief review. We need to bump up review numbers. That helps with the algorithm. And then remember, we have the relatively new YouTube and Rumble channels, brand new. Those are small channels, but they are slowly growing, and we want to direct more views over there when we can post videos. Sometimes, due to the nature of what we're discussing, we can't post, at least to YouTube, but we're trying to grow our presence there. At any rate, thank you for joining us here today for this episode. My guest on this week's episode of California Liberty Project is Louis Marinelli. And Louis is the president of a very interesting organization called YesCalifornia. And I just recently became aware of some of YesCalifornia's work via social media. I saw them on Instagram and saw them some other places, looked into them just a tiny bit and said, wow, this looks really interesting. This organization is doing something that I think could be a very good thing. We want to learn more about it today. And that it goes right hand in hand with what we're doing here on this podcast. So once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Louis, for being with us here today, and really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on your podcast. It's going to be an interesting conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I had seen is with your organization, CalExit 3.0. And that kind of caught my attention right off the bat because I was thinking, oh, okay, this is really cool. Which part of California would be exiting? And obviously the name implies something like Brexit. You know, we're thinking of Lexit. I'm thinking of these different kind of secession movements, either politically in terms of an actual polity or an ideological kind of secession movement. And so this is 3.0. There must have been a 1.0 and 2.0, but let me just back up there before we get too much into the weeds and before I start asking questions, because I've got a lot. I'm really interested in this topic of liberty and potential secession and individual or localized control, decentralization. Let me ask you to tell us a bit about YesCalifornia and tell us about CalExit 3.0, if you would.
Yeah, sure. Well, CalExit 3.0 really is a rebirth of our campaign because, as you mentioned, we've had a couple of different attempts at our campaign at CalExit 1.0, CalExit 2.0. But CalExit 3.0 is really at its root an effort to rebirth the campaign back to its founding principles. And as an organization back in 2014, I helped found this organization based on the same type of principles that are found in the Declaration of Independence, the same type of ideals that were believed by our founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson, for example, believed in a great Western Pacific Republic on the west coast of North America that would be kind of brothers with the United States of America, but not part of the United States of America. And so that fundamental philosophical root is what we're trying to restore with CalExit 3.0, because unfortunately with CalExit 2.0, when I was living overseas, the organization was allowed to be taken over, I believe, by, well, frankly speaking, people infected with the woke mind virus. To put it bluntly. And so I wanted to come back with CalExit 3.0 and return to the philosophical beliefs of the root of our campaign, which was not about, extreme leftist policies, not about wokeism, not about progressivism so much as it was about the right of self-determination, the right of individual liberty, and the other principles that are a part of our Declaration of Independence and founding documents. And so CalExit 1.0 was that idea. CalExit 2.0 went off the deep end with extreme liberal politics when I was unfortunately stuck overseas. And the organization was led by other people on the ground following the Trump election. And now that I'm returning to the United States, we want to try again, go back to our roots and establish a campaign that's not about the far left. It's not about progressive politics. It's actually, frankly speaking, I'm more of a nationalist myself, more of a right-wing activist myself. And so I want to see us return to the kind of philosophical beliefs that were the founding principles of the United States, which was itself created through secession from the British Empire. And so we're going to return to that general principle and those philosophies. And to get to the other question you mentioned, in order to do that, because we do want to also incorporate what's going on currently in the United States with this, polarization and the divisions in this country that I think are irreparable, we need to pursue what we call a national divorce. And so what CalExit 3.0 will be is a kind of national divorce in California, where we divide the state largely along its ideological lines. Now, of course, we're not going to be able to draw a perfect map. And so there is no perfect map that perfectly divides California into two parts, a left and a right, or even the United States into two parts. It's not going to happen. There's always going to be, as I say, Republicans and patriots stuck behind enemy lines, no matter where you draw the lines. So unfortunately, we're not going to ever have a perfect map. But fortunately, in the case of California, there is a pretty significant divide between the left and the right, geographically speaking. And, generally speaking, you can say that the left inhabit the coastal areas of the state, and the Republicans and the conservatives, the patriots, they inhabit the northern counties, the inland counties of the state. And so we want to divide the state along that geographic boundary. And so right now what we have are 22 counties along California's coast in the Bay Area that we are essentially going to say should secede from the United States to save California and save America.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I've always talked about a lot of that actually right on this show, at least for the first few months of this show's lifespan, which has been really cool, kind of beginning to explore some of these ideas about, is California too big? Is California too politically divided and radically diverse in terms of politics? And you're absolutely right. In this state, and again, I've talked about this also, what people might not know is there is this geographic divide, which tends to fall right along the coast mountain ranges. So you get this thin coastal strip, one county deep at most. And even the eastern parts of some of these counties are very conservative or libertarian. But you get this thin coastal strip of progressivism and awful policies and, this thirst for statism. And that's what people think of as classically being California, right?
Yeah.
But then you go inland, and California's Great Valley, the Central Valley, deserts, the mountains that I've talked about many times, those regions are very either conservative or just kind of populist or apolitical or even libertarian, such as the northeast part of the state, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about, because we're never going to be able to make that perfect map. And so what we did was, when we looked at California geographically speaking and superimposed on it, the division between the left and the right, the blue counties and the red counties, we had to decide where to draw these lines in a way that would, allow the conservative parts of the state to not be dragged out of the United States against their will, because it wouldn't make any sense to, have the whole state of California secede from the Union and drag tens of millions of conservatives against their will along with you. So we wanted to kind of save them from having to be taken out of the United States. And so where do you draw those lines? And so there's a couple of different approaches that we examined. We could do, for example, look at it by county basis, which was what we ended up doing. We could also look at congressional districts, which we looked at, but The problem with, for example, drawing the lines based on congressional district is nobody really knows where those lines are. So there's no real reference to, I live in the 30th congressional district and I know where those boundaries are. Nobody really knows where those boundaries are. So it's not something that people are really accustomed to representing or looking at on a map. So they don't know those boundaries. And also there's no actual political establishment or government for those congressional districts. We can look at House districts. You could look at state Senate districts, state assembly districts. You can look at even, there's a map with county supervisor board districts. And so what we did was we looked at all of these districts and we saw where are the deep blue districts, whether it be state assembly, state Senate, the supervisory board districts, the counties, for example. And we overlapped them all together. And we got a picture of, well, these 22 counties more or less are blue counties. And no matter at what level you look at them, at the county level or at the state assembly level. And so what we did was we decided that it's best to go with the county level because people are familiar with counties and the counties have their own government systems already in place. Whereas, for example, a congressional district doesn't. And congressional districts go across counties. So we decided to go at the end of the day with counties. However, the downside to that is, as you said, some of the counties are themselves, liberal or progressive on one side and conservative on the other side. And so we had to kind of represent this idea that no map is going to be perfect, just like no divorce is ever perfect. And both sides are going to have to be willing to give something and take something. And so we decided to cut it down the middle and say we're going to go with counties. And we found at the end of the day 22 counties that are more or less blue counties that we're going to have secede from the United States. However, again, within those counties, there's also some questions that we've received about particular counties. For example, San Luis Obispo County is not particularly a very radical left-wing county. There are more registered Democrats there than Republicans, but it's a pretty even split. So people say, for example, well, why would you put them in your group of 22 counties? And the reason is simply you have to, if we're going to have the west coast of California secede from the Union, they have to have a country that is geographically connected to itself. So we can't have, for example, San Francisco and the Bay Area be a part of this country and Los Angeles and Ventura County, but then they're not physically connected to each other. So for the sake of maintaining the contiguous nature of these 22 counties, we had to say, for example, San Luis Obispo County would go with them as well. So again, there'll be no perfect map, but we think we have a good map that at least makes a situation where the seceding country is a very progressive country, 3-1 Democrat over Republican. And the resulting state of California that remains after that is a smaller state. And it's not even quite a Republican red state even, because there's still more registered Democrats than Republicans. But the interesting thing is that California, in this scenario, becomes a swing state, where there's about maybe 500,000 or 600,000 more registered Democrats to Republicans in this state, but there are 2 million independent voters. And so I think it would be an interesting situation where California, the state that remains after the secession of these 22 coastal counties, is actually a swing state in national politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking too about, geography, diving into that even a little bit more. And most of the audience here is in California. We have a lot of folks from Texas and other places listening in too, but there's a lot of familiarity, right? So in the South, and I really like the map. I've had similar ideas, similar thoughts to the way your organization has drawn out the map. Okay. So in the South, the very far South, San Diego County would be part of the remaining California, whatever that would be called. Orange County, that makes a lot of sense. Now, these would be the big population centers, right, of the remaining California. And I say remaining, I don't know if there's, you've adopted a term for that, but it would probably still be California, right? Because that would be remaining in the Union, I think.
Yeah,
right?
we decided not to get too deep into renaming the state of California. It is going to be the state of California, so we have enough on our plate already when it comes to separating the two, so we figured we would not touch that issue. But yeah, you're right. Those are the two main population centers. There are a lot of Democrats there, which is why the state of California, after this CalExit situation, remains a swing state. Because otherwise, if you take out San Diego County, I'm pretty sure it would be a pretty solidly conservative state.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's always the question. Now, there's the big military and naval presence in San Diego. San Diego, people from outside of California might not know this, but San Diego is a much more balanced. It's less of a crazy blue city than is like in LA or San Francisco or certainly Berkeley or Oakland or, Silicon Valley. But yeah, San Diego, it makes sense for that contiguous nature of having the seceding California or whatever that would be called. It makes sense for there to be geographic contiguousness or contiguity, however you would say that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly the equation that we looked at. Was we said there's a massive military presence in San Diego, and why complicate matters by telling the United States that you're going to lose, your major naval base in Pendleton, for example, other naval facilities down there. That just makes it more difficult to sell the idea. But also, you're exactly right. The kind of Democrat you see in San Diego County is not the Democrat you see in San Francisco or Los Angeles. And so, again, this idea is really about trying to get the extreme far left liberals and progressives who are, I believe, ruining the country as a whole to go and build their progressive utopia of their own on the Pacific coast and leave us out of it. And I think that a lot of moderate Democrats, many of which live in San Diego, would not want to be part of that utopia.
Sure. Yeah. Just show some stock photos of the past 2 years from San Francisco with the piles of needles and human feces in any public park or children's playground. So let me ask you too, speaking about geography, before we kind of move off of that. So then in the north, this was interesting. I noticed that I think, is it Del Norte County? Is that the farthest northwest county along the coast by Oregon?
That is.
Yeah. So Del Norte County would remain with California, right? And then, so is it Humboldt County right underneath that, just to the south of that?
Humboldt County is the most northern county is seceding. Yes.
Okay, got you. So it's basically from Humboldt County in the north all the way down to LA County in the south. And it's only basically one county wide, right? All along the coast.
Yeah, except for the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, you get into Sacramento County, you get into San Joaquin County and those areas.
Thank you.
But basically, you're right. It's basically one county wide along the coast with the exception of the Bay Area and Sacramento Valley.
That's right. Thank you for reminding me of that. And I really like that, by the way, because when I've gone through a similar thought process in my head before, if I were going to design it out or take a scalpel, and cut out parts of California that are really problematic, let's say. Certainly Sacramento is California's swamp. In some cases, literally out by the Delta, but certainly figuratively, metaphorically, right? And all of that government infrastructure and the union presence, the lobbyists and all of that, I think it would be great. They can have their utopia. They can go along with the state that would secede. So that to me makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you then.
It's dominated by the left right now, and everything they built was built by the left. So let them take it with them. That's what we say.
Sure. So any thoughts about what the new capital would be in remaining California?
I don't know. That's something that we were talking about. We just didn't come to a decision, and we didn't decide that actually we have to. I think that the state itself can make that decision once this hurdle of CalExit is made. The population center in San Diego would be probably a prime candidate, but it defeats the purpose of having it be a state that's more balanced politically if you have the most quote unquote blue area of this new state become the new political center. So I don't know. It's difficult to say. And there are other problems that arise as well, simply with logistics, because when you have, for example, Los Angeles seceding and Sacramento seceding, it's logistically difficult to get from, for example, Fresno to Redding without traveling through this new country. You'd have to travel through on the 5 through Sacramento, for example, or vice versa if you're going from Fresno to San Diego. How do you get there without going through Los Angeles, which is seceded from the country? So
Right.
The good news is that the progressives love open borders. So I'm assuming that
Right.
their country would be one of open borders, and so there would be no problem with Californians of the U.S. state of California being able to travel through those territories. Guys, we're going to rely upon that idea, actually.
Yeah, I love that. I'm sure they'd be rolling out welcome mats as well, right? And remaining California's homeless can all just be welcomed right into coastal California. I'm sure that'll be their policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask philosophically then. I saw this from your website. And let me quote. It says, "The new CalExit campaign returns to its original philosophical roots of classical liberalism the Founding Fathers wrote into the Declaration of Independence, and it provides for the secession of 22 counties from the Union to save California and save America," which is great, very big language, very heady language. Talk to me about what the organization means by referring back to classical liberalism and Jefferson and Locke, and those ideas of famous classical liberals that infused much of the Declaration of Independence specifically.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I guess I take issue when it comes to talking about the liberals in this country is that they've hijacked the term liberalism, which is, I think, I wish I could call myself a liberal without being ashamed of it. But the problem is that people don't make the differentiation between today's liberal and classical liberalism, which is the type of political philosophy of our founding fathers. We talk about John Locke with life, liberty, and property. That's classical liberalism. And so going back to what I was talking about in the beginning of our conversation, we want to go back to those principles that were espoused by our founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, property. We want to go back to those, the political ideas of the Enlightenment that were the inspiration for the United States of America and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and so on and so forth. And so I don't call myself a liberal today, although classical liberalism is kind of the original idea that was these ideas of life, liberty, and property, for example, and the Declaration of Independence. And today it's kind of evolved into this, this nanny state situation where the government takes care of everything from life until death. And I just don't want to associate with that. And so I don't even call myself a classical liberal. But the truth of the matter is that this campaign is founded on those ideas. We want to achieve what Thomas Jefferson envisioned for the West Coast, which was that independent republic. And he wrote a letter actually describing what he thought it would be as an independent republic on the West Coast that would be a kind of like a brother to the United States, but not part of the United States. And so we want to achieve that goal. And so our campaign at its root, I think, is very American, and for two reasons. One, because it's talking about secession. And the United States exists today because of secession. The Founding Fathers were secessionists. They were insurrectionists. And so when you talk about, insurrection and secession and so on and so forth as being un-American, I don't think that there's anything more American than that, because that's why this country exists today. And secondly, I would say it's very American because the idea of it is one that was supported and dreamt about by our founding fathers themselves. And so for those two reasons, I really take issue when people say, for example, oh, you're a secessionist, or you want California to secede, you're an American, you don't love your country, and so on and so forth. That's not true. We are in our hearts patriots, because we support secession. We support revolution. And of course, we want to do about it peacefully and legally. But we support these ideas because those are the ideas that are in the Declaration of Independence, the country's founding documents. Talk about the right to revolution, so on and so forth. So we support those principles. Now, we're not going to go out and start, shooting people. We're not going to go out and start a war with people. And this thing people also bring up, for example, the Civil War, for example. Oh, you're going to start the next Civil War because California secedes.
Yep.
That's inaccurate, because when the Civil War started, it wasn't because one of the or several of the states seceded. In fact, they had all seceded for several months prior to the beginning of the Civil War. What started the Civil War was the act of violence against the Northern Army. And so, of course, we're not talking about political violence. We're talking about revolution. We're talking about a peaceful revolution. Just like, for example, people talk about the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, right? For example, which split up Czechoslovakia in today's Czech Republic and Slovakia, two countries that exist side by side peacefully. They're allies, military allies, economic trade partners, but they were once one country, and they divided peacefully under what's called the Velvet Revolution, or the Velvet Divorce, actually, I think they call it. And so we support those types of ideas, and I think that we can achieve this separation of California ideologically, much along the same lines that the people of Czechoslovakia were able to peacefully divide their country between what is today Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Yes, and this revolution might actually be one that the CIA is not starting, unlike a lot of those color revolutions in Europe, right?
Exactly.
Aside from that, I was going to ask you, have you already started getting that neo-Confederate, label? People will throw that out at you, or, something as idiotic as, oh, do you support slavery, or something like that? That is such a dumb statement, such a cringe statement. But believe it or not, everyone listening to this podcast, I mean, I mentioned it before, but this is the intellectual quality of the objections to political decentralization and self-rule, peaceful self-rule and secession, right? People just go to, well, you must support slavery. And it's like, what are you talking about? What fraction of a percentage of normal people support slavery in 2023? It's absolutely insane. But this is what you begin to hear when you talk about these things. There have been some great communicators and expositors of these ideas. I'm thinking even of like Tom Woods just recently wrote an ebook on the peaceful national divorce, essentially political decentralization. The crazy idea that people should be able to run their own lives with local arrangements, if they wish, local governments, state governments, or what have you. And it's incredible the pushback that a lot of these folks get, not only from the left, who accuse them of being pro-slavery, crazy neo-Confederates, which is nonsense, but then I even wanted to ask you as well about pushback from modern so-called conservatives, Con Inc., Conservative Inc. A lot of these people who are infused with this Lincolnian, these ideas, the Lincolnian myth of some sacred pre-existing union, and that once those 13 colonies, or once these states enter into this bond, they can never dissolve that bond ever, even peacefully. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is this movement going to find a lot of resistance coming from the so-called right, which are basically a lot of neo-Lincolnian unionists, like big, strong central government types in the vein of Hamilton, Lincoln, and so forth. Even the Straussians, I think, might be of that ilk.
I think I would have agreed with that maybe when we started this back in 2014 and 2015, when we were traveling around the state talking about it, and we ran into conservatives who were still nostalgic about this idea of perfect union and perpetual union and so on and so forth. But I think that today there are a lot of conservatives who really want to see California secede from the union. And I think they wanted to secede from the union because they associate that western coast with all of California. They forget that there are more Trump voters in California than any other state, for example.
Correct.
That's why we want to separate these 22 coastal counties from the state, because that's not California as a whole. That's the coast. That's coastal California. And that's where the problem is. And that's what we want to have secede from the union to, as we said on our website, save California and then save America as a result of that. And so I think that when we travel around California, as particularly in the part of the California that will remain in the union, and across the country to talk about this idea, I'm pretty sure that a lot of conservatives will support the idea once they understand that we're getting rid of the progressive cancer that is allowed to live and thrive in the coast of California, and it's ruining the rest of the country. And so I see a lot of support from conservatives, especially on social media, but I expect I'll see it on the streets as well, simply because I think that they're tired of the impact of coastal California on their culture and their way of life. And we have two diverging sets of values in this country. They are incompatible with each other, and we have to have a divorce. And I think that the perfect way to start that is not this idea where people simplify national divorce as let's just, take the red states and the blue states and make two countries out of it. That makes no sense. You're not going to have a country when, you have California and New York in the same country, but all the states in the middle are a different country. You're not going to, that goes back to that idea of contiguous territory. So I know a lot of people think national divorce means, we're going to have two countries, blue states and red states. That's not going to work. But what we can do is we can divide the state. Who said we have to abide by the existing state lines, first of all? We don't have to do that. And that goes back to what you were saying, where people believe, well, the lines were drawn, the union was formed, so that's the way it is. That's the way it's going to be forever. I don't believe that has to be the case. I think we can redraw the lines, and that's what we're doing in California. And I think that what we do in California can set the pace and can set an example for what can happen in other states as well. In Oregon, for example, and Washington State have the same geographic divide between the left and the right with the mountains. And I think that they could kind of do something similar if they want to there to save the the eastern counties of Washington and Oregon from the progressive cancer that's developing on the coast there. And so I think that we're setting an example in California of this national divorce idea of dividing the left and the right without abiding by existing state lines. And also, we want to promote the idea of free association. You were talking about before that a lot of people believe that the union was formed and it's perpetual and it can't ever change it. Well, we believe in freedom of association. And, people we used to have in this country, divorce was illegal or unable to happen if a woman wanted to divorce her husband. And it's like that in other countries around the world. But now we don't have that. And so why do we live in a country where, as a state, your ancestors could have voted to join the union voluntarily 150 or 200 years ago, but now you're still stuck in that same union and you don't have a say in that just because it was already a question that was answered 200 years ago? We think that the people of the states ought to have the freedom of association. And if they don't want to associate with the union anymore, they should be able to peacefully secede from the union. And I think that that's a question that will make its way back to the Supreme Court. The last time the Supreme Court talked about anything related to secession was Texas versus White following the Civil War. And contrary to public belief, they did not say that secession was unconstitutional. They said it was possible with the consent of the other states. And so if we take the idea that even back in the years following the Civil War, the Supreme Court said that a state can secede from the union with the consent of the other states, we can support state secession without being anti-American, without being, as you said, neo-Confederate and so on and so forth, because it's a very American idea. And that's what we're doing in California. And I think that that's what we do in other states around the country as well.
Yeah, and it's a very classical liberal idea. And in America, a lot of conservatism, whether or not right-wingers like it or not, real right-wingers, but a lot of conservatism is informed by some classical liberal ideas coming from Jefferson and Locke, as you mentioned. And some of those are, yes, you have the right to peaceful voluntary association, self-government. And again, if a people or a group of people decide that this political arrangement is not working out in their best interest, then they have the right to dissolve those bands, as Jefferson talked about. And I think I would fully agree with that, as long as it's done peacefully. And of course, the Constitution is silent on this issue of secession. So even if the Supreme Court gets involved in this case or others, whether it's California or other states, parts of those states seceding, at a certain point, it's like, okay, thank you, Supreme Court, for your opinion. But your opinion, 9 justices in black robes in Washington, D.C., cannot control the political will of people who are voting on their own political future, on their own liberty. And it really doesn't matter to a certain extent. If a group of people or a polity is going to leave the union, then they're going to leave the union, I would think.
I agree. I agree. Now, I would just point out, because you said something that I wanted to mention. I agree that the the effort needs to be a peaceful one. But I think it's important to define what peaceful means, because I don't think that we're going to achieve this goal, or any other state's going to achieve the goal, simply by holding a rally and holding some banners up in front of a state capitol building.
Right.
I don't think that's going to be the case. There needs to be some form of physical activity involved. And I think that if we look at what happened across the country in the summer of 2020, I think that the left and their riots around the country have set an example for what is qualified peaceful protesting, isn't it? And so if what they did in the 2020s, in the summer of 2020, after George Floyd and so on and so forth, is okay, with burning down buildings and riots in the streets, I'm not saying that that's what we're going to do, but I think that they've really raised, or I guess you could say lowered the bar of what qualifies as a peaceful protest. And so I think that if we do have civil protest in the streets, and it's more than just holding a sign in front of a state capitol building, then I think that we can achieve our goals.
Yeah, and I guess it depends if we're using CNN's definition of a fiery but peaceful protest, or
yes, exactly.
or a different definition. But it's funny, yeah, because they use the Summer of George, or the Summer of Hate riots, when many federal buildings were burnt down or destroyed or left to be abandoned, I think, in a couple of cases. And then you compare that to, I guess, a true insurrection, allegedly, January 6th, where there were even Capitol guards that were letting people in to walk through the Capitol, and a few windows were broken, and podiums were stolen, which I don't condone that, but it's amazing, the juxtaposition. And you had talked about, the 22 counties. I wanted to go back to that. Yeah, there are the 22 counties. And then for the listeners, the flip side of that are the 36 counties here in California, which are amazingly diverse, not only geographically. And this is an idea, too, where, even going back to the Constitution, I think you would probably agree with this. Let me know if you do. But the House of Representatives, of course, was meant to represent people, literally per capita. It was like heads of people. It was there to represent people equally. But of course, there were certain smaller states that said, no, we need the idea of a state, of our land, of our statehood. We need that to be recognized as well. So that was recognized in the Senate before the progressives turned that into just a vote by popular, by people as well, or number of folks in the early 1900s. But here in California, so we have most of the land would be in these 36 counties. Now, of course, most of the population would be in the more dense or densely populated coastal counties, right? But in the 36 counties, they're geographically quite disparate, quite distinct. And also some of them are super conservative, as you mentioned, very Trumpian or populist. There are a lot of Latino Democrats, like in the Central Valley and in Southeast California, parts of the desert. There's a very libertarian streak in Northeastern California, particularly the Jefferson region. And I wanted to ask you, have you talked to any of the folks or any of the organizers or proponents of the state of Jefferson idea up in far Northern California? Are they aware, or have your two movements or organizations kind of met up and strategized together at all?
So when it comes to strategizing, we have not yet, but we have definitely been in contact over the years with the people from the Jefferson movement. The problem that we have with I guess we don't have a problem with them. The issue is that they're not really politically organized for an actual campaign. They're more about, talking about it on the radio, or they have, a meme on Facebook or something like that, but there's not a large movement or organization about actually getting it done. And a lot of the people that are involved in it and passionately believe in it, and I support the general principles of the Jefferson movement, they're more of a generation that's prior to social media. And so therefore they don't really have the social media skills that would be necessary for running a campaign. If you go, for example, I'm not sure what their website is, but I've seen their content, and it's just not up to par with what needs to exist in a political campaign of the 21st century. And so I think that our campaign, especially now that we have CalExit 3.0, returning back to those philosophical roots that I think the two of our groups could agree upon, would be willing to work with them to help them incorporate their ideas perhaps into the CalExit 3.0 campaign. Because when it comes to the root of the problem, why Jefferson wants to secede from California is because of Sacramento, the double cross. Is that they have those two crosses on their flag, the double cross. They feel like they've been betrayed by Sacramento, betrayed by the coastal parts of California. And so if we remove those elements from the equation, then there's no longer a need for them to secede from California. And so from that point of view, I think that we can definitely work together, and I would like to, and I plan to, reestablish our connection with them so that we can work together with them in the future to build a campaign that is on par with expectations of the 21st century. I think it's really important to have, a website with the social media campaign, videos, content, graphical representation of your ideas. And it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be high quality, and it needs to be available on many different platforms. And that's kind of what I see lacking when it comes to the Jeffersonian movement up in the north there. And I think that's something we can fix if we work together. Another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to touch upon was the, this idea where California is going to divide into two sections where we have, as you said, most of the population is in the coastal country, which we're calling Pacifica, and most of the land is in the U.S. state of California. I think, if I recall correctly, it's a 78-22 split, where 78% of the land of California remains the state of California, and I think it's 22% of it is seceding. That's a big gap there. 78-22 is a big gap. But really, the gap with the population divide is not as stark. It's, I believe, 56-44. And so if 56% of the population would be part of the seceding counties, whereas 54 or 44, I guess it would be 56-44, my math is really bad.
Right.
44% of the state would still be a part of California. So even though, 22% of the state is seceding, they're taking 56% of the population with them. But that still leaves 44% of the population to live in the 78% of the state's territory.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point. Certainly, there's going to be a large population center in the south, but then also a lot of mid-sized cities throughout the Central Valley, and of course, then spanning all the way up to the north, all the way through Redding, essentially. So that is key. Let me ask, as far as any buy-in from maybe liberals or Democrats out on the coast, or what would be Pacifica, have you worked with any of their groups? Is there buy-in from the so-called left on this? What are their thoughts in LA, San Francisco, the Bay Area, and such?
I think the difficult problem with them, and I think you kind of alluded to this in the earlier part of our conversation when you're talking about the logic of the left, is it's difficult to get them to sign on to this idea now because they happen to have a Democrat president and Democrat Senate. But wait 2 more years when we have, for example, Ron DeSantis or maybe Donald Trump is reelected president in 2024, and the Republicans have a great Senate map in 2024. I would say wait 2 years from now and see what the progressives on the coast are saying then. All of a sudden, I'm pretty sure they're not going to want to, it's not my president, not my country, so on and so forth. And I'm sure they're going to be more than happy to secede. By the way, we're going to hope to have our vote that year. So when they're on the precipice of seeing that the United States is going to elect Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump or somebody else, certainly a Republican Senate, unless they put up these poor candidates like they did the last election, then I think they're going to understand that they're about to enter a period of Republican governance again in Washington. And I'm pretty sure they're going to be pretty willing to vote yes to secede from the United States as even a preemptive measure so that they don't have to live in the United States under Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump.
Okay. So you're thinking preemptively, because I was thinking as we were going through our conversation, the best thing that could happen maybe to this movement, to CalExit 3.0, would be if Donald Trump gets reelected, say in 2024, of course, and then the midterms in 2026, when liberals and the left in general are losing their damn minds again with Trump derangement syndrome, and they'll be desperate to do anything to leave. Maybe the worst thing would be if there's like a Mitt Romney, John McCain, Bush type candidate, someone from the squishy middle, that's Karl Rove approved, or some rhino or whatever, rhino warhawk, typical. That might be something that would tamp down maybe energy for this movement. I just spitballing here, just thinking out loud.
Well, you're right, but what we're working on right now is we're hoping to get qualified for 2024, and if we don't qualify, we haven't qualified in previous attempts, so it's not out of the question that we may not qualify this time around. But we do intend to qualify for the next general election, that's 2024. And so in that situation, if that happens, and the 2024 ballot is a ballot when Californians are voting for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, for example. I don't think it'll be Joe Biden on the ballot. They're, of course, going to be voting for Kamala Harris. But they're going to probably realize that she's not going to win because the rest of the country gets a vote too. And so in that situation, I think it's going to be a pretty easy sell to say, hey, although you're not going to get Kamala Harris, you're going to get Ron DeSantis, you're going to get Donald Trump, whoever the Republican is on the ballot. The Republicans are going to win the Senate, and you have a choice. I can vote now and vote to secede from the union now, or I could vote against that and decide to say, well, I'm going to stick with the Republicans in Congress. I'm going to stick with Donald Trump in the White House. So I think it's going to be a great situation for us when we want that vote to take place, where they're not going to just vote for secession or remaining in the union, but they're also going to be voting for it in a very timely moment when they could decide. It's not just the abstract idea of seceding from the union. This is, do I want to live under Donald Trump in January, or do I not want to live under Donald Trump in January? So I think it's going to make the question much more lively for them.
Yeah, and crazy leftists are always screaming and saying every time there's even like a Mitt Romney that's threatening to be elected, they say, I'm going to move out of the country. I'm moving to Canada. Yeah. Well, here's kind of their chance to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Well, people like Mitt Romney, those rhinos, they're on the ballot as the Republican candidate for president, and the left will call them Nazis and so on and so forth. And then after that, when Mitt Romney's in the Senate criticizing Donald Trump, all of a sudden, look at Mitt Romney. He's the only rational Republican out there. So
exactly.
It's very hypocritical.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you really quickly about the mechanics of what this would actually be. You mentioned getting qualified for the ballot. Would this be a proposition for all of California's 58 counties, or would this be something on a county by county basis, like in the 22 counties, or how does this work? How does the ballot qualification process work on this?
So it'll be a citizen-initiated constitutional amendment that will be a statewide ballot initiative.
Okay. So it would be related to this would be one of those constitutional amendments that the people all vote on in 2024.
That's right.
Okay.
And so we're also going to incorporate an extra layer of voting involved in it because, like you said, there is the question of the 22 counties. And so we are going to require that the counties that are seceding, that each of those have a majority. So it doesn't have to win in every county in the state, but it has to win at least in those 22 counties. And I think it will because they're the most populous counties. But what we want to avoid is a situation where, California approves the ballot initiative to say that these 22 counties are seceding, but those 22 counties themselves didn't agree to it. So we want to make sure that it's a legitimate vote, and we're not like kicking anybody off the island or anything like that. That's just not. I mean, as fun as it sounds, it's just not democratic. It's not
exactly.
It's not the right thing to do. You wouldn't kick somebody out of the country, and so although I'd love to, but it's just
as much as we might want to kick San Francisco.
We want it to be a legitimate vote. So therefore, at least those 22 counties have to, by majority, approve it. And then whatever else happens statewide so that it gets approved overall will happen so that it passes.
Okay, very good. Very good. That makes sense. So no one's getting overruled in like a San Luis Obispo County or something if they say, no, we want to remain part of California. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think that what we're going to do is, in that situation, we might have an additional trigger or a section in our amendment that if a particular county votes against, for example, San Luis Obispo, but the other surrounding counties are for it, maybe we'll redraw the map, basically. We're not going to have it kill the whole idea because one county said no. So we're going to present it as the map that we have now. And in fact, actually, the map is open for discussion. I know that some people have suggested, well, the Central County Valleys, some of the Central County Valleys where the 5 runs, maybe should be a part of the coastal, just for transportation reasons and stuff like this. So there's some ongoing discussions about adding a county, removing a county, this or that. We have a map that we're pretty happy with, but of course, there's always going to be conversations about where to redraw the lines and so on and so forth. And so we're open to that. That's where public comment comes from. And if there's enough public comment that says we should add or remove a particular county, we're going to take that in consideration. Maybe we'll adopt that idea. We'll have our team discuss it. But I think that we're happy with what we have now. There's a consensus on that. There are some minority ideas about other counties. Some people, for example, I know you mentioned Orange County in the past. Some people have said we should add Orange County because it's not so much because of the political aspect of it, but because of the economic zone of Los Angeles County. It's kind of interconnected with Los Angeles County. Then dividing it all of a sudden would be harmful to its economy. So the bottom line is we can't just factor in the ideological question. We have to factor in transportation zones and routes, culture, geography, economic questions. And so that's why the map will never be perfect, because even if we do draw a perfect map ideologically, then you had to start talking about, does this make sense geographically? Does this make sense economically? So there's so many different logistically. Yeah. So even, for example, like I mentioned in the beginning, logistically, it's kind of a difficult situation where you have to drive through another country to get from one part of your state to the next part of the state. That's a problem. It's a legitimate question. So we can't address that without saying, well, we're going to rely on them having open borders as they want anyway. So there's that question. Okay, so if we address that question, what's the alternative? The alternative is to throw in Riverside County or throw in San Bernardino County into the equation or something like that. So there's always going to be the back and forth. We're going to be open to conversations about changing the map, but right now I think we got a map that we have some consensus with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know this is early on, and again, I'm thinking in my mind how this would work, knowing so many of these counties very well. Even if it ends up being northern LA County, which is sparsely populated but very conservative, and northern San Bernardino County remain with old California, and eastern San Luis Obispo County remain. But all these considerations will have to be made. And the transportation one that's a key consideration, going into and out of another country, certainly.
Yeah. But it wouldn't be the only example in the world. There are other countries in the world, particularly if you go, for example, in India and Bangladesh, they have an even worse situation with the border between India and Bangladesh, where they have like little pockets, or even in Kyrgyzstan and other Central Asian countries, they have like a pocket of a country here, and it's surrounded by a country. Then they have the rest of the country way over here. So it's not unheard of, but of course it's not ideal. So we'll try our best to address those issues. But I think that we have a map that we're generally happy with right now, and I think we're going to move with that unless we have some swelling of public support for. We want to join the seceding counties, and okay, freedom of association.
Very good. Where can people go, Louis, to learn more about this movement, and if they wish to even get involved or to volunteer?
So I would say directly to our website at YesCalifornia.org. It's where the basic information is available on one spot. We also have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram accounts where people can find the graphical representation of our campaign, especially on Instagram at official CalExit. So the hashtag or the name tag there for the campaign is official CalExit. On Twitter, we're YesCalifornia, and on Facebook, we're YesCalifornia. And so people can go there, read up on the information, submit their ideas, their suggestions. We're open to new suggestions. And if they seem to be pretty popular, then we will incorporate them into the CalExit idea. We do have to file an initiative for this campaign to officially start, which I think we'll probably do sometime later in the winter, or maybe in the first couple months of spring. We're not exactly sure when yet. We like to choose symbolic dates for our initiatives. For example, we originally had planned to file on Valentine's Day, for the symbolic nature of filing for a divorce on Valentine's Day. I'm not sure we're going to make it there in time for that. We're going to try, but we did that in the past. We might do it again. We're going to try, but I can't guarantee we're going to be able to get it there by the 14th of February. But other than that, we have other dates in mind. For example, the day that California became a state, September 9. Of course, that's much further out into the year than we'd like to, but if it gets down to it, we might have to do that. We also have June 14th, which is the day that the California Republic kind of established itself with the Bear Flag Revolt back in the 1840s. That was June 14th. The American government kind of incorporated that date as Flag Day, so people celebrate Flag Day in the United States, and it's actually the day that California Republic was established in 1846. So we might do it on June 14th, and we might do it on on February 14th. I certainly hope we don't have to wait until September, but I think that we'll most likely do it either in February or in June.
Okay, very good. So make sure, everyone, to go visit YesCalifornia.org and check out all of their social media sites and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. YesCalifornia.org. We've got all the raw data
awesome.
On the, what the new country of California or new country of Pacifica will look like. Got all the raw data on what the state of California will look like. And this is going to be the first ballot initiative on national divorce in the history of the United States. So we hope that it sets an example for other states and people to follow.
Fascinating. Thoroughly American, thoroughly Jeffersonian, rooted in liberty, rooted in some of the American revolutionary tradition. And Louis Marinelli, I really appreciate you coming on. Fascinating conversation. I'd like to have you back on from time to time as the process moves forward to check in
Sure.
on what's going on. And, as I learn more about it, maybe things that you're discovering about the process, it'd be great to find out more about that.
Definitely.
But,
we definitely want to welcome any of your listeners to participate in our campaign, especially if they're like-minded individuals who like and love liberty and the basic philosophy of the American founding fathers. Then this campaign is open to you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Louis, and hope to talk to you again in the future.
Thank you so much. Talk to you later.
This has been the California Liberty Project podcast. Make sure to subscribe, share it with others, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter.